We got a lot of mixed reaction when we said that we were going to put a Slant Six on a Miata. Most of you guys thought it was cool, right? It's like, why not, right? Put a Slant Six on a Miata. And a lot of you guys are like, why a Slant Six? Why would you put a Slant Six? It's a terrible engine, no performance. You're right. And that's one of the reasons why I fell in love with the Slant Six. Because it is a terrible engine. It's a great engine, it's a great like tractor engine, it's a great like pedestrian engine, legendary longevity, but from a performance standpoint, they're hard. Here, I'll show you why. The main reasons why. When Chrysler engineers were given a task to design this engine, okay, the very first thing they were told, and what they had to stick to, was make this thing as low and as short as possible. The slant is to accommodate the low, to get the motor, down out of the hood line. It was designed to fit this engine compartment, actually for the 60 Valiant, but this is essentially the same thing, the same dimensions. And it had to be short. And one of the ways they accomplished this shortness was by tilting the motor over, they moved the water pump back so it's not in front. And they went with a very small bore, 3.4 inch bore. So by saving an inch here and an inch there, and remember, they weren't tasked with building, an engine to go head to head with the best 6 cylinders, in the market at the time, the full-size Chevy and Ford, a lot of different sixes in the day. They were tasked with making a European-style engine that'll fit in a European-style car in a very cramped space. And those are the design limitations that they had to deal with. That small bore spacing is a big problem. Let's be clear about this, right? A Chevy inline, a Ford inline, an AMC, Jeep inline, the 4.0, the Hemi 6, everybody talks about the Hemi 6, all of those would be much better choices for a performance engine. But I love the Slant Six. I fell in love with the Slant Six. I don't know why I do. I can't really put my finger on it. But the challenge of making these things run is kind of like what turns me on about the whole thing. It's not supposed to. Oh, the other limitation, of course, is the reverse flow head. With the intake and the exhaust runners on the same side, the mixture's got to do this. And that's not a happy high RPM situation. Coming up with a cross flow head for the slant is nearly impossible because the push rods, the whole lifter galley and everything is exactly where the exhaust would be. And of course, you'd have to relocate the oil pump, you'd have to relocate the ignition. It's just an almost impossible thing to do. Even an overhead cam version which would allow you to do away with the push rods and all of that would still have this basic limitation that this is the exhaust side that you've got to work with in a passenger car. So, it's kind of a lost cause as far as performance goes. But here's the thing, right? It didn't have to be that way. It's almost like Chrysler went out of its way to handicap the Slant Six for the domestic market. I don't know why they did this. One of the first programs that Chrysler engineers developed for the Slant Six was called the Hyper Pack. Now the Hyper Pack, I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with it, but those who aren't, the Hyper Pack consisted of a single 4-barrel intake manifold with super long runners to put the carburetor, a 4-barrel carburetor, an AFB, all the way over here. It also had a set of long tube cast iron headers. So they were 3 into 1, okay? And they came like this. And these 3 cylinders were joined at a common collector here, and these 3 cylinders were joined at a common collector here. That was available over the counter in 1960, 1961. 1962, they stopped offering it, and here's the craziest reason why, right? They went to the gear reduction starter that we all know today. Previous to that, they had a direct drive starter, and it didn't have the solenoid mounted over here. So these 3, the 3 header branches for the back cylinders come right exactly above the starter, and they will not fit with the gear reduction starter. There is a company that makes what they call a split manifold. It's a dual exhaust manifold. And what they do is, here, I'll show you on one of these manifolds here. What they do is they cut the branches and create two outlets. But the outlet isn't the problem. This size outlet is more than enough to flow a 225 cubic inch engine. They add the second outlet, doesn't really do much good. The key to the Hyperpack was having those long runners. But at any rate, that was a dealer option. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't going to be a production thing anyway. But for the domestic market, Chrysler insisted on keeping the one-barrel carburetor. They originally had the Carter BBS and the Holly 1920, two very small carburetors. But there was a two-barrel version available at the same time. All of South America had a two-barrel Slant Six. There was a Marine 225 Slant Six that had a two-barrel carburetor. But the whole time, U.S. domestic production cars could only have the one-barrel, single exhaust. And you want to see how restrictive this was? How restrictive Chrysler treated the 225? Come down here. See this? That's a stock original tailpipe for one of these cars. Do you see the size of this thing? Okay, this is what these engines had to exhale through. Crazy. No performance potential to be had in the basic package. They wanted you to, if you wanted to upgrade to a higher performance engine, you were going to go with a V8. That's pretty much the only thing I can think of. So, up until 1977, the domestic market, the U.S. market, Slant Sixes only had the one-barrel carburetor. Beginning in 77, they introduced a thing called the Super Six. So the Super Six is essentially the old Marine manifold. It's the South American and Australian manifold, but they upgraded it so it would have an EGR passage here. This is one of the later ones. Originally, the first couple of years of Super Six production for the two-barrel, these were made out of cast iron. And then, I believe it was in 1979, they went to this aluminum casting, which is significantly lighter. They're known for being porous, but I've never actually found one that suffered from porosity. Like, for instance, if you look at this casting, you see how rough that is. Okay, and that's the seam. They're all like this, but the actual runners themselves are always solid. So I guess as they're known for being porous. If you eyeball it, you say, well, that's just the worst casting ever, right? But I've never actually seen one where the runners themselves were porous. So let's talk about why we have this thing here. We've got our Miata. Like I said, a lot of you guys were like, you know, you're wasting your time putting a Slant Six in it. You know? This is going to be cool. Trust me, this is going to be cool. We're building this in two phases, as I explained in the previous video. I've got the core motor coming this next week. That's a 170, and we're going to put it in there stock. I'm not going to open up the motor, but I did want to upgrade it just a little bit because, I mean, you know, you're going to go through all of this work and just run the one barrel. So I picked up the Super 6 intake for it. And we'll use a Carter BBD. All of the production single-barrel Slant Sixes, like the 170 we're putting in here, had the carburetors that flowed approximately 185 CFM. Some were a couple more, some were a couple less, but all in that 185 CFM range. The Carter BBD that came on the Super 6 setup flows approximately 285 CFM. And the unusual thing about this, right, and this is from first-hand experience, when you go on a Super 6, when you go from the stock single barrel to the Super 6, not only does the car feel peppier, like, you know, just snappier and more responsive, but your gas mileage goes up too. I know it's counterintuitive going from a single barrel to a two barrel. It's like, well, how do you improve your gas mileage? Well, the truth is, it takes that much less throttle opening, so there's more velocity through the carburetor, better atomization at low speeds, and because of that, it makes more power and uses less gas in and around the town thing. So it's one of those things that, you know, it's like, why did they do certain things? The 225 should have had a 2-barrel in production from the very beginning. So that's what we're doing with that. This is the carburetor we're going to use. The Super 6 had specific carburetors, and the choke arm was oriented differently, and they were metered differently. You know, they were jetted a little bit leaner for the application. But these 318 BBDs, and even the older Strombergs, are great carburetor. You find those on pre-1966 318s and all. It looks just like a BBD, but it's made by Stromberg. This is the carb that we're going to throw in there for now. I'm probably, when we upgrade the motor, when we hot rod the motor, I'm probably still going to stick with a Super 6 intake manifold, but we'll use an adapter and a 350 Holley 2-barrel. More than that, I don't think this engine is really going to want. I'm mostly concerned, because it's going to be an autocross car, I'm mostly concerned with, you know, response more than flow. So keeping the carburetor on the small side, sacrificing overall power on the top end, but, you know, it'll keep the motor tight, you know, into the throttle. So that's what we're working on with that. So let's talk about the car. So a lot of you guys were like, you're going to destroy the handling of the car, it's not going to work right. No, I have the plan, okay? So, as I explained in the last video, I'm using the stock sway bar as the forward boundary of where the motor is going to sit. A lot of you guys are, well, just move the sway bar and put the motor forward. No, 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 no. What we're doing is we're setting the motor way back, okay? This is where the crankshaft, this is where the crank pulley is going to sit, right about over here. And here's the front of the oil pan. The motor is going to be way back here. And what we're doing is we're making the car more like a Corvette. We're moving the center of gravity lower, and we're moving the center of gravity back. So if anything, this thing should actually improve the handling. We're taking, by my calculations, I have an exact number, but by my calculations, we're adding approximately 160 pounds total to the car. So where that 160 pounds is, though, is going to improve this car, not, you know, make it worse. But I'm looking forward to it. Like I said, I've never done anything handling related, so this is like a new thing for me. I'm really looking forward to this. And as soon as we've got the motor here, I'll hack the firewall, and you know, oddly enough, I don't have a core motor that I could just stick in here to mock up. I gave the last of them away. So we'll have that motor next week, and we'll get it cut. This side right here doesn't have to be changed. By my basic measurements, it's going to sit just about there, right? The intakes, the carburetor. So all of that's got to get moved. Fun project. And like I said, the first phase is going to be a relatively stock engine, so that we can get the car running and get it sorted out and whatnot. And then we're going to build a hot motor for it. I want to, you know, the 170 to end all 170s. Has anybody ever built like a 170 at all? I don't know. I love this stuff. I'll see you tomorrow.